third is we are recording this session to be uploaded to the Digital Culture Network YouTube channel soon. And if you don't know, the Digital Culture Network supports digital skills development in arts and culture, and it's made up of 9 tech champions, each with their own specialism, based in Arts Council's 9 regional offices. And we support organizations through one-to-one support, training, and resources. And since the formation of the Digital Culture Network, we've been very, very lucky to have built up an excellent partnership with the team at Google Arts and Culture. And we partnered on, before COVID, in-person digital skills training day. And very, very recently, they published an excellent toolkit and resource called Connected to Culture, which Moira from the Google Arts and Culture team will talk through very briefly towards the end of the session. But they've also partnered with us on this series of webinars, which we've also christened Connected to Culture. And really, it's about kind of understanding how arts and culture organizations over the last 6 months have used new technology, either maybe to kind of rethink kind of the content creation or even business models. But this session in particular is about understanding how organizations have reached out to new or existing digital audiences over the last few months, and what that behavior and consumption pattern or patterns, might mean for the future. And I should say, I feel duty bound to say, what this session isn't is kind of a how-to guide or an instructional webinar that will take you from the point A of identifying an audience to B, kind of engaging with them. For that sort of thing, there are plenty of excellent kind of toolkits and content from organizations like The Space, like the Arts Marketing Association, Audience Agency, as well as Connected to Culture, Playbook, and the Digital Culture Network. This session really is about hearing from an amazing panel and about their experiences of either understanding audiences or engaging with them over the past few months. And on that, joining us today is Adrian Lambert, Chief of Staff at Hay Festival. If you don't know the Hay Festival, it's an annual kind of arts and literature festival, which, throughout, for as long as I can remember, has had, a continued focus on increasing digital access to literature and the arts. And this year, due to COVID, the festival has moved its program entirely online. So let me kind of do this again, Adrian. Can you just kind of say hello so that everyone can see you?
Hello there. Hi there.
Hi, Adrian. Thank you. Next is Katy Rains. Katy is an arts marketing specialist and co-founder and partner of Indigo Limited. And Indigo Limited are the cultural consultancy responsible for the recent audience surveys, After the Interval and After the Interval Act 2. Katy, are you there?
Hi. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Katy. And then we also have Phillip. Matthew is the CEO of Carnival Village Trust, London's development agency for carnival arts, and also executive director of Notting Hill Carnival. And again, due to COVID, this year Carnival, moved to an entirely digital program. Matthew, can you say hello?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Matthew. So what we'll do first is I'll ask a couple of questions to the panel, and then we'll bring in the questions that either you've submitted or will submit using the Google chat. But Katy, I thought I'd come to you first because, the insight that you have might be useful to frame the conversation that we're going to have. And I think for me, from After the Interval, I was definitely struck by kind of the insight that you've got on digital audiences. So I wondered whether, for those who kind of are less familiar with it, whether you could give a very, very quick overview of what After the Interval is about, and then secondly, talk about some of that insight around the digital audiences that you found.
Sure. Yeah. So we ran 2 surveys between April and July, so kind of peak lockdown period. It involved over 500 organisations who each emailed their databases with some questions that we'd devised. And originally we'd devised these to understand how audiences were feeling about venues being closed and about missing live events and when they might think about booking. But after the first survey, we realised that actually we needed to ask some more questions about digital and how people were engaging with digital and what some of the gaps and barriers might be. Now, it's important to understand that the people that that responded were core theatre goers and concert goers. They were the regular core audiences. So we only looked at that data. We didn't look at people who very rarely engage with culture. But on the basis that these are the most sort of avid and engaged cultural attenders, what did we learn about digital culture? Well, firstly, over 2/3 of them had engaged with digital culture overall, and well over half of those had done it for the first time during lockdown. And with 95% of them saying how much they were missing live events, it's clear to me that digital culture really filled a gap for people during that period. And interestingly, almost 85% of them say they're interested in digital culture in the future. But those sort of figures mask, I think, some key differences between certain audience segments. So I was really interested to see whether audiences, perhaps more contemporary audiences, were different from audiences for more traditional work. And certainly that was the case. So the contemporary audiences, the people who attend the more contemporary work, new writing, contemporary dance, stuff like that, although they're often the smallest proportion of a venue's database, this audience is the most interested in a wide range of digital content. They particularly want to see things that have been developed specifically for online rather than filmed versions of what they see in a theatre. They're the least phased by accessing the technology, and they're willing to pay for digital culture, but they have very high expectations of the quality. So if you contrast that with the more sort of traditional audiences for maybe more classic work, classic drama, classical music, that kind of thing, these people want to see digital culture that most closely resembles what they see in the theatre. So they want a full-length production. They want a kind of proper concert, in inverted commas, done in a pretty standard way. And the more mainstream audience, the people who might attend rock and pop and comedy and that sort of stuff, their main motivation for attending live performances is the social aspect of it, attending with other people. It's not so much artistically driven. So for them, things like events that happen at a certain time that they can watch along with their friends and engage on social media are really important. And then finally, family audiences, they've engaged with less with digital than the other segments, but are possibly the ones who place the most value on it from the comments that we saw in the survey. They're the most likely segment to be willing to pay the same as for live, partly because many of the pain points of attending a live experience have been removed. So there's a lot of practical benefits for them. But one of the reasons they haven't engaged with it as much is the content. They want more interactive and participatory content. And I haven't personally seen a lot of that. Think Joe Wicks, that's what they're after. The arts equivalent of Joe Wicks is what they want. So I suppose what I've learned from the survey is that although generally people are warm to, they want to view digital content, different audiences, as within real life, want very different things from you digitally.
And so, Katy, if that's a snapshot of digital audiences over the last few months, how do you think that's going to change as recovery begins? Or, we've had a question from Joanne Kachev, which is on similar lines from Manchester Collective. How can we use that data to really think differently about who their audiences could be kind of moving forward?
Well, I think in the same way that they wanted different things from us during lockdown, we'll need to develop different strategies for the different audiences going forward as well, for both live work and for digital work. The contemporary audience is the most likely to say that they'll return to venues soonest, but they're also the segment most interested in a wide range of formats, including digital and outdoor, actually. So my view is that these are the people that will reward you for continuing a digital offer as long as it offers something different to or complementary to that you're doing in the live experience, rather than trying to be a carbon copy of it. The more traditional audiences are the segment most likely to stay away from venues for longer and to wait and see before they return. So they may have a longer need for online culture, but they're also, I think, from what they've said, the most likely to ditch it completely once they're back to attending live. And of course, they're the ones that want the very traditional format. So you've got a kind of a really difficult one there about, keeping them engaged with quite traditional content. I think the mainstream audience, which is usually the biggest proportion of a lot of venues audiences, they're the most price sensitive. They have the greatest need for reassurances about refunds and exchanges for live events, and they want to attend with other households. They typically attend with friends or groupings. So, and they want to know that it's still going to be fun when they come back to live things. So I think it's going to be the tricky thing to entice those back live, and also perhaps the trickiest bunch to engage digitally unless we can come up with some sort of more interesting interactive formats. And I think families are saying they won't be rushing back to venues with social distancing, because wrestling kids into specific seats and making sure they don't spit on the woman in front of them is going to be quite hard. So I think they're looking for ways of engaging their kids digitally and in immersive stuff and outdoor stuff, and are really open to lots and lots of different ways of doing that.
And Katy, we had two very similar questions from Zoe Sadler from the Reading Agency and Nicola Wood from Canalside Heritage. And it's about, it's tempting to just think about a digital audience as a way to communicate with audiences now that we can't do it in person. But, we also need to remember that, a significant proportion of that audience maybe either don't have access to digital platforms or kind of struggle with it. Does anything come through on that from the data set or the research that you've done?
Yeah, I mean, there's two groupings that's very clearly a problem for, and one is disabled audiences and the other is rural audiences. So when we looked at the cuts of the data around those, in both cases, they have in real life more limited access to culture than other audiences. And unfortunately, COVID's just made that worse. So for disabled audiences, a much higher proportion of them will wait a lot longer before they come back. There's a greater demand from them for online culture than there is for non-disabled audiences, but they have problems with the technology. They say much more than other audiences that they have problems accessing the technology. And in fact, Glasgow Disability Alliance did some research that showed that only 1/3 of disabled audiences had access to broadband. And similarly with rural audiences, they've actually got a higher demand for online content than general audiences, than urban audiences, but almost 1/4 of them said that broadband was a problem for them. And I know these are things that our sector can't fix, but they're certainly things we need to be aware of, because it's the groups that are already having challenges to attending that are having even more challenges through digital.
Indeed, thank you, Katy. So Adrian, we'll come to you next. And when COVID hit in March, I imagine that you and the team were probably in the final stages of putting together an entirely live event. So when you decided to take Hay Festival, online, did you have a lead time to change some of that content and tailor it for an online audience? And also, I was interested in your use of Crowdcast and YouTube as the two main streaming services, and especially around kind of what that brought and what how that added to the options of engaging with the content that you had and that you put out.
Yeah, we had very little time to turn around. I think what lockdown was end of March 23rd, I think, and our festival was live by mid-May. So we had about 6 weeks to turn stuff around from being a live festival into purely digital and online. And there was two elements to that. One, we have a big schools and education program at Hay. And normally that takes, the festival normally runs for 10 days, from a Thursday through to the following kind of Sunday, so 10 or 11 days. But we extended that period into a 2-week period to encompass a bigger and wider program for schools. And it's interesting hearing Katy talk about the engagement of families and that. And what we did with that particular part of the festival is we pre-recorded those. We just figured at the time, we were just getting used to researching all the platforms. We had to go out, we had to look at Crowdcast, look at Zoom, look at all those things we got used to very quickly as a society about how do we get online. Researched it and came up with Crowdcast as our most preferred platform. And then started to think about the practicalities about that, not only working with artists from their own home, and obviously you're entirely dependent on the technology and their broadband connection that you're connecting with, but also how we film those and how we engage with them. We decided in reshaping some of the content with the schools program that we pre-record those. So we went out and we contacted all our schools program, and we set up, in Crowdcast, it's quite good. You have a kind of a green room situation. You can invite them in and obviously talk to the person and then film and record them. So that's how we recorded all our participants for the schools program. And they all provided activities for the young people, for the families to follow as part of their program. For the live program, much of what we did, I guess, was still pretty similar. In many ways, we were quite, Hay sort of the model of what Hay is people talking on stage. So we're not talking about a major kind of theatre production with 6 or 7 actors on stage at once and a set and having to relight for sets and all sorts of different things. You're talking generally about 2 or 3 people or more talking. So in that sense, it's slightly easier. We approached a lot of our speakers, and they were all wonderful actually, and threw themselves into it. We looked at there's certain events that we had to rethink about how they'd work online. There was a big gala evening we were going to have at Hay for Wordsworth, which featured Vanessa Redgrave, Benedict Cumberbatch, Tom Hollander, Monty Don, Simon Armitage, and stuff like that. So again, putting that program together was difficult because some people were in Australia, some people were in London, some people in America. So again, we pre-recorded all those, then put them into an edit and put that together as a whole program, recorded separate links to that with Shahida Bari. And we presented that as an hour and a quarter long event as one particular thing. So that's, we also had a piece that was given to us by Helena Bonham Carter and Dominic West, a Shakespeare piece, which she actually recorded in her back garden, specifically for the festival, which would have been, I don't think was going to be anything at the festival we were going to do with that. So that was specifically created for the festival itself. Then Ali Smith had a film made by the artist Sarah Wood to accompany her piece that she wrote. It's half-hour piece, which is a fantastic piece of work. Again, it was purely done for the digital space. And also a piece by Fernando Montano, a dance piece, which he made his dance piece for us and recorded a documentary about his life in Colombia, growing up in Colombia and at the Royal Ballet when he moved over to London. And also a time-lapse movie we did of Jackie Morris to the Spell Songs soundtrack, with her constructing a painting through about 45 minutes of the Spell Songs soundtrack. So there was a kind of a slight combination. I think majority of the events we had were things we probably would have staged at Hay and would have been actually events at the festival. Some we adapted, pre-recorded, edited, refined slightly, could put music to, could do all those different things you do in a normal film edit and present those out. We found Crowdcast to be the most stable platform for us. Apart from the Wordsworth Gala, where we crashed the whole Crowdcast system, which was kind of interesting for a moment. We had about 15,000 people logged on to watch that particular thing. They have to pre-register via Crowdcast, and obviously that became very popular. And although we did warn them that we thought it was going to be very popular, it did end up crashing their system for a while. And that made us, because it's right at the start of the festival, we were also, as well as streaming via Crowdcast, which has a very specific registration system, which is kind of something you have to get to grips with to communicate to your audience about how they navigate these systems. We quickly learned that we need to put out a separate stream via YouTube at the same time as a backup. The chat bar on Crowdcast, as you can have one on Vimeo as well, Vimeo Live, is incredibly popular. I mean, the people wanted to chat all the time. So there's lots and lots of chatting. Obviously, what you also find yourself doing as a moderator is also being partly IT help. So I did have a lot of IT questions, which I'd copy and paste into chat bars very quickly, which consisted of refresh your screen, try logging on and off again, and all these types of different kind of problems we'd have. But also what we did was we ran a backup stream to YouTube. So should it fail completely and crash completely, we could quickly go on our chat bar and say to people, here's a link to YouTube, go and you'll find it there. As it happened, most people would still stick with Crowdcast and watch on Crowdcast, which is our preferred way of them watching it. It's a much kind of neater system. I mean, we had a donation button on there, which is really important. So people could donate live as the program went on. We could remind them in the chat bar to donate. We could remind them about subscribing to our Hey Player service and keep pushing different messages. And also they could ask questions to the authors as well, and we could present those. And we would, again, moderate those and push those through. But we also had to use a different, we also used we had a system in between that. So it's not quite as simple in the sense that we have, it goes from the artist's computer, it went through to then two guys who were sitting, I can't remember the name of their system, but they basically mixed the pictures and then pushed those pictures to Crowdcast. So there's someone sitting in between. We tried it without that, but it was technically too difficult and too ropey. So we did have, ultimately, you know, about 5 or 6 people watching this stuff to make it happen all the time, really. So it is quite labor intensive.
And Adrian, with that content, you know, who engaged with the Hay Festival this year? You know, did it do what you set out to achieve? Was it a different audience? And you know, how could you tell? What were you using?
It was amazing. It was far more, I guess, successful than we thought it was going to be in many ways. It was really quite at the start of all this, really. And the registrations were amazing. We had 500,000 people register to watch the events. We had 104 events, which is far more than we thought we were going to stage. We had people from 70 different countries across the world. And that was the thing that astonished me, I suppose, most, is that suddenly you were linking and connecting with people. We have festivals not actually all parts of the world anyway, but we suddenly found ourselves, you know, talking, saying hello to California, or hello to Sri Lanka, or hello to Cambodia, and that was quite amazing. We had a load of over 8,000 donations. The whole festival was free of charge, but the donations were big. We had no way of which people would, because of the registration process, which is essentially using Crowdcast as a register for Crowdcast and not us. And that's the one thing we're going to be probably changing going forward, certainly. And in terms of audience feedback, the kind of detailed audience feedback that Katy's talking about, we don't have from these people. The only thing we have, I guess, is the evidence and such that we picked up a lot from emails to us, and certainly through the chat bar, which is people who hadn't been to Hay before. They could have lived too far away, or they're normally too busy, or some might find it too expensive because they've got to buy a ticket and they've got to buy accommodation to stay and travel down there. So there was an awful lot of that. It became quite clear quite quickly that whatever we do going forward, and hopefully when all this is kind of over somewhere in the distant future, we will have to continue running some digital service alongside a live service. There are so many people who had this huge appetite for what we were doing. And also, of course, it always has been kind of global in the sense that you put stuff on the internet, people can see it wherever they like. But there was a sudden, I guess, more of a realization you are connecting with these people across the world all at one time, and also in their time zone. So you had people who were getting up in way early hours of the morning or staying up very late at night as we ran something in GMT. So that was kind of very interesting. So yeah, so that from that side of it, the accessibility, and people said to us they consume more because they weren't time limited. If they came to the festival, they might come for a couple of days, have enough time to spend a couple of days there and then go. But because they had essentially 14 days, it was on all the time. And what we did was we would put the film up, the events would go up, and they'd stay on Crowdcast for another 24 hours following the event. So people could still catch up on what they wanted to. And after that period, they got taken down and we put them onto our Hay Player service, which is a subscription service, which people pay to watch. And we saw subscriptions for that go through the roof for that service now. Yeah, so that's extraordinary.
Thanks, Adrian. So Matthew, we'll come to you next. And you know, the Notting Hill Carnival, you know, it always happens across the August bank holiday. Did so again digitally this year, but it felt like to me that what went online, you know, was a slightly different proposition. And obviously there were lots of performances there, but it felt like a real sort of 360 view of what Carnival was about. So I wondered if you could just kind of tell us about what you're trying to achieve with it this year.
Well, Carnival is such a vast proposition kind of in real life, and we were, you know, it was blatantly obvious to us you can't recreate Carnival online. So we took the, you know, the current climate, you know, the situation we're all in at the moment as a time to kind of pause and reflect on the last 54 years of Carnival, where we're at now and where we, you know, could possibly be going into the future. And we, you know, we decided that actually broadcasting Carnival in real life would be a great thing. So before we even started planning the program for this year, it was in our mind that anything that we were doing wasn't just for a throwaway just for this year because we can't be on the streets, but we saw it very much as sitting alongside the real event when it comes back to the streets. And also this year was an opportunity to educate, you know, the wider public about Carnival, why it's there, what it means to people, but not just the wider public, also Carnivalists. You know, Carnival is made up of like almost like 125 mini events that happen at the same time, you know, in close proximity. And each of those bands, whether they're bands, sound systems, masquerade bands, steel band, Brazilian bands, are almost, you know, they're mini communities in themselves. And all of the organisers of those, when in the build up to the August bank holiday, they're very much kind of blinkered, focusing on the mammoth tasks that they've got to do for their small part of it. So we wanted to take this opportunity to educate the Carnival community as well. Some of the feedback we had from, you know, one of the Carnival pioneers who's been in Carnival for 40 years, she didn't know half of the stuff because for 40 years she's been concentrating on her own mass band and getting that band on the road. So that was our main outset, what we were thinking about and what we were going to produce, that it wasn't just going to be about the performance. We were going to take an opportunity to give people a bit of insight to the people behind the festival, because it takes literally hundreds and hundreds of people for the most part in a voluntary basis, and people don't really see that. They just see what they see on the news. They might see costumes, or they, in a lot of cases in recent years they've seen kind of negative things coming from the press. So we wanted to make sure this year was an opportunity for Carnival to tell its story. So we embarked on a number of partnerships, including one with Google Arts and Culture, which is about the history. And we've been working with Moira and her team. We've been creating Google Arts and Culture page around the history of Carnival, and it's really interactive. It's something that it's an ongoing project. There's a lot of interesting things on there at the moment, but we've got 54 years of history, so we're kind of barely scratching the surface. So that's what we wanted to do, present Carnival, show it in its widest possible form, and also take the opportunity to develop partnerships and embrace new technology that can sit alongside the event. I think the whole world has been fast forwarded 5 years in where they might have been in in terms of using some of the emerging technologies. So we just took the opportunity to run with that.
Yeah, and even it kind of in one of the sections that I watched, there was a performance from a band at the Royal Albert Hall, and then it cut to an interview about that band and the work it took to get there, which I thought was fascinating. And that integration or that involvement of the community in what you did came across so powerfully across the weekend. But in that chat that we had, it also sounded as if by bringing in the community, it also helped kind of stimulate or provide a foundation for a bit of an audience development strategy as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So one of my other roles is I run a community building in Notting Hill called the Tabernacle, and we have a youth program. And the youth program that we do here is very much driven by the young people. We don't sit in the office and say, oh, they'd like to do this, they'd like to do that. We very much quickly react to what they want to do and meet with them and consult. We took a similar approach with the Carnival community, in that throughout the whole process, even prior to making the decision of not being on the streets, we were sitting down with all the bands and participants and getting a feeling of how the pandemic had been affecting them and what they saw the next coming months to look like. Because the idea was to consolidate all of these communities together as Notting Hill Carnival, so that when it came to marketing it or planning it, and planning it, the team is much bigger. So they could kind of, when we had to get messages out, we'd be sending out messages and press releases, but also with 125 other organisations that are part of the ecosystem of Carnival.
Brilliant. And then I think when we spoke first a couple of weeks ago, it was just after Carnival, and I think you just received the kind of the analytics report. And again, a similar question to Adrian, really. What were the results? Did it kind of stack up with what you were expecting? And what were the main insights? And then also, I suppose, on a practical level, where were you getting these insights from? What sort of packages were you using to put it all together?
Well, everything kind of far exceeded our expectations in terms of engagement across all of our social channels. We partnered. We chose to use YouTube as a broadcast partner, and what we did wouldn't really have been possible if we didn't have that partnership and support from them. Because what we did, I'm not sure that, I don't think it's actually been done before. There was times over the weekend where we were streaming 3 channels simultaneously live on our one YouTube channel. So and we were also kind of warned early that some of the stats that we might see in real time may not be as reflective. So over the weekend, it didn't look like the numbers were healthy, but 24 hours after the event, when the back end of YouTube kind of kicked in, I was floored by the results. Almost over 7.5 million impressions. The engagement across each channel was fantastic. And we, a lot of the partners we got on board. So we partnered this year with Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, Google Arts and Culture, YouTube, and all of those platforms have amazing analytics built into their systems anyway. So a lot of the information that we got via via the, the analytics that sit on the back end of YouTube or Instagram or whatever services they are. In terms of people that signed up for us, we also, we did our sign-ups for an experiences app, but what we did over the weekend, we made it freely available. And the arrangement we had with because we wouldn't be getting that data, that we entered into an agreement with Let's Go Do, which is a new experience app, on the understanding that any data for people signing up for this would be shared. So we would then have the audience, the information and the details of the audiences that signed up within ourselves, so we could use moving forward.
Yeah.
We definitely see it as sitting alongside the real event as we move forward.
Excellent, Matthew, thank you very much, and thank you to the panelists. So now I'd really like to turn to some of the questions that we've received, and please, as I've got a moment to remind you, please use the chat function to get some in to us, and I'll try and get through as many as possible. But the first one I've got is from Alice Hubley, Cockpit Arts, and her question is: there are a lot of digital events happening, but as an organisation, we want to do something that stands out. So how might they do that? Matthew, any thoughts on how Alice might go about that?
It's really about partnerships. So we realised very early on, to do it on the level that we did it was, enormously expensive. Probably more expensive than doing the real life carnival. So we embarked on partnerships and seeking sponsorship, and most of what we achieved. So when we were going out and talking to partners and potential sponsors, we knew what we wanted to achieve. Now, to us as an organisation, we're not trying to generate profit. It doesn't matter to us if somebody contributes the money for that or they can help deliver that service. And I'd say 60% of what we achieved this year wasn't through any kind of monetary exchange, was through partnering with organisations and companies to deliver it in partnership. So it's about finding the right organisations, I would say, to partner with to deliver your vision once you've got your vision of what you'd like to do.
Thanks, Matthew. And then we've had a couple of questions around evaluation. Some from Ali Corell, Edwina from A&D Festival, and one that's just come in from Jess White. And I think that there are probably a couple of questions wrapped up in one. So the first one from Ali is: how can you get meaningful feedback from online audiences? And Jess White from Bowes Museum has asked, I have a question about how to do evaluation in the moment when you deliver live workshops online. So Katy, I'm going to come to you, but before I do, I feel duty bound as an Arts Council employee to highlight the toolkit and questionnaires that the Audience Agency and Counting What Counts have. But Katy, what else could we be looking at to do that?
It's messy, isn't it? Because it's like you've got all these comments in the moment, which is a bit like standing in the foyer or the bar in the interval, isn't it? And listening to people. And I don't know about other people, but I, as marketing director of a theatre, I used to do that regularly, because you got more feedback that way from standing there listening to them slagging off the production or talking to their mate over a drink than you would get on any survey. So for me, there's the kind of in the moment stuff, which is the equivalent, I think, of them standing in the bar. And I imagine, I don't know, maybe Moira from Google can help us with this, but I imagine there's all sorts of fancy techniques for sentiment analysis and all that kind of stuff, which I imagine cleverer people than me are able to do. But I think that's really important. But I think also there's the afterwards thing. So there's the trying to scoop up all the comments people are making, which is just a goldmine of information. But then there's the opportunity afterwards. And I would say a couple of things on this. One is that the Impact and Insight Toolkit have obviously developed a specific survey for digital, which they've been working with a few organisations. So I think that's definitely worth it, because I think it's also about understanding the impact of the digital work and how that might be different from your live work and with which audiences. And the second thing that I've tried with a couple of organisations is doing a Zoom panel, which is something that we never would have been able to do before, because our audiences would have gone, what, Zoom? But I think where you have got data and people that you could approach to say, would you just come and talk to us about the experience? I've found that really, really useful. And people have been really honest and been willing to give you some great qualitative feedback.
Great, thank you. Good tips, Katy. And then another question where a few people have asked something similar. So Helen Gibbs from Sirius and Kathy Lewis from Wessex Museums And Helen's question is there a danger to making online arts programs free as the norm in the digital world, or does it devalue the sector and not help it get back on its feet? So Katy and Adrian, I'm interested to know what kind of your take on this, but I'm also going to add, I think, an extra question in, because over the last 6 months, a lot of the content we've seen has been free. Katy, I wonder if you can give us a sense of how possible that might be to charge for some of those things and to see it become a kind of an income stream. And then I suppose going back to the spirit of Helen's question, you know, by giving away things free online, does it pose any kind of risk to arts and cultural organizations as they recover? Katy.
Well, I think I've heard a lot of people say that audiences expect content to be free, and I think there's a few reasons for that. I think obviously a lot of the content put out at the start of lockdown was free. I think there's some huge challenges around paid for content, so particularly rights issues with classical music, stuff like that. Some content, and certainly again at the start, it was far easier to get the same or more money from donations than it was by trying to ticket something. And for a lot of organisations, maximising reach was more important to them, so that, you know, making it free was pretty key. And also on these Zoom panels that I had, it's a common misconception amongst audience members that digital content is cheaper to produce, reaches a global audience, and therefore makes us all tons of money, which, you know, I'd love to talk to somebody who that's true. But having said all of that, I don't think audiences do expect it to be free. On the research that we did, although less than half had actually paid for it for all the reasons above, only 4% of them expect all digital content to be free. And people say that they're more willing to pay for work that's been designed for online than recordings and things like that. And those who are going to stay away for longer, you know, the more traditional audiences who won't come back, less affected economically by COVID, are more willing to consider paying for digital the same as for live. So I think it's the same as for things in real life. People will pay for something that they perceive to have a value to them. And it's about, as I said earlier, matching the kind of offer and the content to the needs that they have at the moment.
Thank you, Katy. And Adrian, you know, I think you mentioned it in your answers that, you know, it almost as if you developed a bit of a kind of a journey or a conversion funnel where lots of people enjoyed your free content, but they also became subscribers to the Hey Player as well. So what's your take on the free content versus paid for?
I think yeah, Katy's points are really interesting, and I must read more of the actual results and the surveys. Really, I think for us, certainly, I think because the precedent had been set about free content when the lockdown happened, it's always one of those things about, you know, arts events going out free of charge and all that kind of stuff and devaluing it. But it was kind of interesting at the start of the lockdown that there wasn't a lot of free content being put out. And we did think about things like Katy said about reach, how we wanted to reach people and give them access to this stuff whilst they've been locked down, and went for a donation model. And we found the donation model to be really, really successful, and so to manage to convert a lot of those people into paid for subscribers on our own video channel. So, I mean, and it's something we're looking at now and considering, because we have normally run a live festival in the winter weekend festival, just a 3-day festival. And that's now going to be a purely digital festival. We might do some odd live things, but again, we hope to do more, but it looks like we're not going to be able to. And for that, we're going to start, I think, playing around with the model a little bit and trying to look at how we can maybe have a donation model with a paid for model on certain events. And we're going to try and experiment with what that feels like to do that for certain people, because we also have a big friend subscription base who we want to provide for. So it's really, yeah, it's a really, really interesting area. And thinking forward to next year, 2021, if we hopefully have something live and we have something digital at the same time, how will we charge for that? Do we have to think about how many people we let on the site because of COVID restrictions? What does that mean if people are coming to Hey, but people can watch it by not coming to Hey? What's the value of that in terms of a ticket price? So there are lots of interesting questions for us to think about going forward. But I think it's really interesting that Katy was saying that, and very interesting to hear that more people do want to pay. And I think that's probably true. I mean, even friends I've talked to and people I've talked to have actually said, I would be willing to pay for this, I think, and pay more perhaps than you think for it. So sometimes perhaps it's jumping with both feet and just charging, I mean, sorry.
No, I was just going to ask, sort of, Adrian, while you're talking about considering, you know, whether you should charge, I was just wondering whether that question kind of was answered, or whether considered by Matthew and his team. You know, whether there was kind of, whether you thought there'd be some element of it that would be paid for, whether it would be all free, and just understanding the decision process behind that.
Well, for us, Notting Hill Carnival is a free event, so it was never really a thought process of us, and we felt it was important it was available. When you come to the real carnival, it's a free event, so any virtual offering of ours we thought should be the same. But obviously it didn't rule out kind of advertising revenue, which we were able to achieve across the channels to help support the costs, which I think is a good model. And I think more and more brands and companies are willing now to contribute in return for having advertisements. You know, it's almost, you know, it's like the ITV Channel 4 model. You know, you can compare that to BBC, where you pay for a license, but on, you know, ITV and a lot of the channels they cover and are able to generate, you know, quite a lot of revenue via adverts. So if you're doing something in your own right on your own channel, you're able to do that as well. So that was our way of getting some income from it.
Makes sense. Thank you, Matthew. And very, very quickly, I'm going to ask the panel, because we had a question from Jennifer Granger, where she's asked, what are the most dynamic and aspirational activities you're starting to see online from arts organisations? So very, very quickly, you know, something that's fired the imagination or really caught your eye over the last couple of months. Matthew, what's caught your eye?
To be honest, the last few months I haven't had a chance to look at much else. We've been kind of blinkered down and still kind of in debrief mode as we normally would. But and what we've been doing is really concentrating on developing the partnerships, because we want to continue doing it. What I have noticed is there is a real challenge in terms of the availability at affordable prices to produce this digital content. So you know, that's what, you know, we've been focused on. I haven't really seen much else. In the early days of lockdown, I was watching a lot of stuff, and we were kind of fortunate that we were late in the calendar. You know, some events literally had weeks to turn it around, as we've been discussing. So we had a lot longer time to zone in and focus. I haven't really seen much, to be honest.
No problem. Adrian, very quickly, and then
I think probably just the ingenuity of people, really. I've seen friends making films purely via Zoom, instructing young people, directing films with young people via Zoom, and the results have been quite staggering, really. You know, it's taken hours and hours of work, and people trapped in bedrooms shouting down computer screens, but the results I've seen have been absolutely astonishing, and that's what's really surprised me. Things that I thought weren't really going to be possible, or the quality would end up being a bit dodgy, have been quite extraordinary.
Brilliant. And Katy?
Well, I'm a keen singer, and I've been amazed at some of the kind of choral stuff that's been possible, where people have recorded stuff in their bedrooms and then they've put it all together. Even amateur choirs like the stay-at-home choir and things like that, what they've achieved working with professionals like the Swingle Singers or the King Singers and stuff have been great. But I think the other thing I've really enjoyed is seeing organisations that would previously have been the kind of custodians of art, like Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery, just putting all their archive online and letting people play with it and do things with it that they're not controlling. And I think sort of democratising some of that content and letting people engage with it in a different way has been really exciting.
Brilliant, brilliant. So thank you, panelists. So we're coming to the end of the session. I just wanted to, I suppose, to quickly sum up and highlight some of the things that really struck me. And I think, you know, the first is the very useful sort of actionable characteristics of, I think, the 4 personas that Katy's found through her research, and how actionable, you know, some of that is. And I think, you know, from Matthew, that leveraging of existing networks to generate an audience development strategy, again, feels very, very powerful. But for both Matthew and Adrian, you know, the experience felt like, you know, kind of less passive, so less about sitting down and watching a stream, but really about that shared experience, as opposed to just kind of something that were less connected with, that generated lots of conversation and connections. So it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much. A very broad insight and very actionable ones too. And on that, you know, I just wanted to quickly pull in Moira to talk about Google Arts and Culture's Connected to Culture Playbook, which obviously covers some of these themes as well, Moira.
Yes, thank you, Owen. And hi, everyone. My name is Moira. I work with Google Arts and Culture. It's been really interesting hearing about all the work from Katy, Adrian and Matthew. So thank you for that. And as Matthew said, it was wonderful to actually help bring Notting Hill Carnival online with Google Arts and Culture. If you want to learn more about how you can deliver your cultural programs and reach your audiences, then we have created a toolkit called Connected to Culture, which is on the chat now. And here you can find a digital toolkit to help you with reaching your audiences, reimagining live events, making the most of your digital archive, and just general inspiration and a lot more information on how to really execute a lot of the things discussed today. So feel free to have a look, and do feel free to reach out as well if you have any questions at all.
Thank you, Moira. And we are already out of time. So, so let me say a huge, enormous thank you to our panel. It's been a fantastic discussion, plenty of fascinating and important insight, and I sincerely hope everyone has enjoyed it as much as I have. And also, I'd just like to say a big thank you to everyone who's joined us too. Thanks for your time. Thanks very much for your questions. And hopefully we'll see you all at the next Connected to Culture webinar sometime very, very soon. Have a great afternoon all.